Hello and welcome to Frankly Speaking, where we dive deep into the biggest news making headlines across the region and around the world, speaking with leading policymakers and business leaders. I am Katie Jensen. On today's show, as world leaders, policymakers and senior business figures converge in Davos for the first in-person meeting in more than 2 years, we speak with the World Economic Forum's president, Børge Brende, to ask whether the meeting can find a solution to climate change, the food crisis or war in Ukraine, and how to turn the talk into real action. Well, thank you so much for joining us today on Frankly Speaking. Now, the World Economic Forum is taking place in person for the first time in more than 2 years. Now, this year's meeting is focusing on working together, restoring trust. But with a worldwide pandemic, a disastrous war in Ukraine, and ongoing economic and environmental crises, frankly speaking, is there still any point of the meeting taking place in Davos?
Well, thank you. And I think the meeting could not have been more timely. Global challenges, as you lay out, needs global solutions. But unfortunately, because of the polarized world, we don't see as much collaboration to really solve wars, climate change, and also a weakening recovery. But we will try in Davos to get leaders together and at least mobilize the private sector to support in these very critical areas.
But there's many who say Davos has become broadly irrelevant, more of a show. Politicians sticking to a pre-prepared script, fancy pavilions, fondue nights and sponsored parties until early in the morning. Frankly speaking, is the forum's problem purely image-related, or has the forum lost its soul?
I think we will see in Davos that we will make progress on many of the most important topics. We will, for example, have new coalitions when it comes to fighting climate change. We'll also see that the Ukrainian leaders will gather there. We will have President Zelensky on video, but we'll also have several ministers and CEOs are coming together, and they are forming a group of CEOs for Ukraine to also secure the rebuilding of the country. We'll also focus a lot on trade and investments. We know that there will be no real economic recovery without a trade recovery. So that's why it's so important that we also have trade ministers, 30 of them, together with Dr. Ngozi, the head of WTO, saying that no new tariffs, no more protectionism, and no more bans on exporting food. So many of the challenges that we are faced with cannot be solved without business. And with the 1,400 CEOs and chairs in Davos, I'm pretty sure we're going to make a progress. And 25% of the participants are women. It should have been 50, but we are making progress.
A quarter just isn't good enough these days. So are you facing WEF is having an image problem? The Financial Times this week said it doesn't portray the right image. Do you disagree with that?
I think we definitely are able to bring together leaders from all walks of life. It's easy to be critical, but I think also the past has shown that the World Economic Forum has positive impact. It is in Davos, for example, where the Global Alliance for Vaccines were launched, Gavi and the Global Fund. It was where also Nelson Mandela came to Europe for the first time and launched the economic plan for South Africa. And this time, it is really about how to make sure that the weak recovery don't end in a new recession. It is making sure that we walk the talk from COP26 in Glasgow. Business leaders, 120 of them will commit to going net zero by 2050. So this is really the place where corporates and governmental leaders are coming together, making a difference.
Well, certainly some big goals there to fix. With so many different disasters taking place in the world right now, how do you decide what gets the most attention? What is the top priority at this year's meeting?
So it is true that there has not been a meeting in Davos taking place against such a complicated geopolitical and geoeconomic backdrop for decades. So I think that comes also with a big responsibility. It's going to be a very serious meeting. So we will have, like, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg and Ursula von der Leyen laying out the land also for more security in Europe. We will have 20 senators and Congress representatives from the US also trying to see how can we end the polarization in the US politics. And from the Middle East, we have a lot of leaders coming, and we know that the Middle East is still incredibly important as it comes to energy for the world. And it's all about decoupling, but it's also about energy security, because with the soaring energy prices we are seeing currently, we will also see really bad effects on the global recovery that is so weak.
Well, I noticed that one topic you didn't touch on a lot there is the crisis in Ukraine. Now, I know that Ukrainian President Zelensky is giving a speech at this year's meeting. He'll be joining via Zoom. However, I also note that, unlike the case has been in previous years, the Russians have not been invited to take part. Now, I've interviewed the forum's founder, Klaus Schwab, several times, and he's always been very proud about his impartiality and his reputation as a bridge builder. But how can you build any bridges or encourage debate if you're not inviting both sides of a conflict?
It is true that we are sending a strong signal by inviting President Zelensky from Kiev. We will have two of his deputy prime ministers. We also have the foreign minister in Davos. When it comes to Russia, we chose not to invite Russian business this year and not Russian officials because there are limits. You know, Russia has broken basic humanitarian law, international law. They're not sticking to the UN Charter, and we've seen so many atrocities. The key for unlocking this and change this is with Mr. Putin and Kremlin, and we need to see that they're taking steps to, again, rejoin compliance with international law before they will be re-invited to Davos. We do have a strong moral obligation to also send this kind of signal in such a situation.
And it's true, Russia must be held accountable for the atrocities that have been committed in Ukraine. However, violations have certainly not stopped the forum from inviting countries like Iran or Israel. So, frankly speaking, it feels like there's a bit of a double standard to invite those countries but not invite Russia.
It is true that over more than 50 years, the World Economic Forum has really tried to bring leaders together. But there are limits. It's an ongoing war in Ukraine where we see that children are being killed in their schools every day. We see women being raped. We see like really war crimes taking place. And there is no willingness for dialogue. Davos is about willingness to find common solutions. And if countries at least are willing to sit down and discuss the future, then it is something else. But today, we see no kind of this willingness from Russia's side. That's why we're very sad that we can not have this dialogue, hopefully in the future, but not today.
But we know there are plenty of atrocities taking place from Israel to Palestine. We know plenty of children, plenty of women as well as men have lost their lives in this conflict. It feels like one rule applies to Russia and one to Israel. Is that because that Ukraine is seen as closer to home for many Europeans?
It is unacceptable what is now happening in Ukraine, and the war is ongoing. When it comes to Israel and the situation in the Palestinian areas, it is at least some willingness to dialogue. We've seen it through the Abraham Accord, but we also see in Davos that we are bringing together business leaders from both Israel and the Palestinian side in an initiative called the Breaking the Impasse. And they're sitting there with global politicians, but also politicians from these areas to discuss, is there a way forward for establishing a two-state solution between the Palestinians and the Israelis. So I don't think this is totally comparable. At least there are a dialogue going on, and we hope for future solutions.
Okay, well, final question on Russia. Of course, you are a former foreign minister to Norway, and you have some incredible expertise and insights into the world of international politics. In your view, how do you see this conflict finishing? Do you think the sanctions on Russia are enough, and is an expanded NATO the solution?
So I think Russia is incredibly surprised by the strength of the Ukrainian army. They were supposed to take Kiev, the capital, in 2-3 days, Kharkiv, the second largest cities, in 2-3 days, and they have seen the resistance among the Ukrainians that I'm sure, has surprised them, and that's why they're pulling back too. I think, unfortunately, they will continue with hitting the Ukrainians in the months to come. But, Ukraine can easily turn into the Vietnam of Russia or Afghanistan of Russia, because when more than 40 million people are fighting back so strongly as the freedom-seeking Ukrainians, Russians will have a huge challenge. It shows that even a very modern and a very strong army cannot kill the freedom-fighting people around the world. So I think this is a lesson for many countries to bring with them and reflect over.
Well, let's turn now to the Middle East and North Africa. Now, foreign officials have recently made many visits to Saudi Arabia. I know back in January 2020, you announced a regional summit for the MENA region will take place in Saudi that year. Now, of course, that didn't end up happening due to COVID. But is a regional WEF summit in Riyadh still on the table? Will it happen in 2023?
No, we are very much looking forward to coming back to Riyadh. So far, we have not been able to take up any of our regional meetings because of the unpredictability related to the pandemic. We were supposed to have our summer Davos physically in China. That might have to be hybrid or maybe only digital. But when times are getting back to normal when it comes to the pandemic, we're very much looking forward to going also back to the Middle East.
So are you saying that the WEF Forum has a new regional home in the Middle East, in Saudi? Because traditionally, we've seen a lot of meetings take place in the Middle East, but typically it's often been places like Sharm el-Sheikh or along the Dead Sea.
Yes, it's true that we have been in Jordan, we have been to Egypt. I think it's about time also that we go to the Kingdom. So we are very much looking forward to have meetings there. If we resume the regional meetings as we had them in the past, that's to be seen. But we really also appreciate the strong delegation we have from Saudi Arabia in Davos. We have 7 key ministers, including the foreign minister, the finance ministers with us in Davos. But we also have very strong delegations from the other GCC countries. That shows that the GCC countries are also very focused on trade, investments, but also doing their fair share of building global stability.
You've been a regular visitor yourself to the Kingdom. You've met the leadership, and Saudi is undergoing sweeping reforms. What, in your view, has been the most outstanding change that you've noticed during your visits? I know previously you've been impressed with the electronic visas and the increasing role of women in power. What else do you see as being some of the most momentous changes?
I'm very glad you mentioned women. Compared to when I visited the Kingdom first time decades ago, the situation for women now in Saudi Arabia is very different. You see them driving when you come to hotels or restaurants. You see women being a natural part of society. And we know that also at the universities, more than 60% of the students are women. This is very important, and I think this shows the new leadership. I think the whole investment in diversifying the economy, but also in the new technologies and in education and skills is very important. Saudi Arabia needs to produce higher up in the value chain in the years to come. where also you inject more technology into the production. And that's why I'm also very happy that we did open our Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, the World Economic Forum Center in Riyadh, just a year ago. And I was there, and I'm seeing so much progress when it comes to also technologies.
You previously said there is a challenge of perceptions with regard to rapid economic change in the region. You said that in the Middle East, you're faced with two kind of realities at the same time. It's one of the youngest populations in the world, and there's a lot of innovation underway, entrepreneurship and startups. But at the same time, there's a lot of conflicts and proxy wars going on in the region. So what role do you see Saudi Arabia playing in all of that?
So I do see now willingness to be very serious in investing the additional resources and revenues coming from the energy sector in diversifying the economy, and also building a very solid sovereign wealth fund. As you mentioned, I have been in Norwegian politics for decades, and Norway built a sovereign wealth fund that is now just the yield from the sovereign wealth fund is the largest income in the Norwegian state budget, and is being invested in education, but also better conditions for Norwegian industries. And I think this is what Saudi Arabia is now replicating. And this will also give a very solid fundament for the years to come, when, of course, oil and gas revenues also will peak. Of course, that will take a long time, but those money should be invested in diversification, education, skills, infrastructure, and also in the green transition that we will see happening in Saudi Arabia. For example, the huge investments now in renewables and solar is unparalleled in the kingdom.
What kind of future projects do you see the World Economic Forum being involved with the kingdom as well? We mentioned obviously launching the Fourth Industrial Revolution project as well, but what other future opportunities do you see?
So we also have initiatives related to accelerating gender equality. I think that should be one of the next steps. We also have a skills accelerator where we have a playbook on how to also reskill, upskill people that are currently not in the educational system. We also have work on enhancing competitiveness for a country. And I think there are areas still where Saudi Arabia can improve. I'm thinking about the tax system, red tape, and I know that the finance minister is very serious on this, and that collaboration is something that we would like even to take further.
You also hold an annual summit on global agendas taking place in the UAE. It typically happens about November each year. Is that still taking place this year? And how does it fit into the World Economic Forum's map of events?
So you're very well informed. I'm so glad we have those global future councils, 40 or 50 of them, that look into the crystal ball and give a recommendation and advice. And they usually meet in November physically in Dubai. I think this year it still will be difficult because of the pandemic, but we're definitely resuming this, and we're definitely back in November 2023. At least that is our plan for now.
Now, Davos opens this week. You say it's more vital than ever to be holding this meeting. And in some ways, I think it's easy to forget that the pandemic is still raging on. A third of the world remains unvaccinated. Do you think some of the big issues that are happening today overshadows the fact that we have a pandemic? And how do we prepare for the next one?
I think it's very important what you just mentioned, prepare for the next one, because we will see new diseases and pandemics, unfortunately, in the coming decades too. We move much closer to nature. You know, just the 10 last years, we lost wilderness in the world of the size of the country of Mexico. So animals and human beings are much closer, and then we will also see more diseases like this. And we should not forget that we're not out of the woods yet. Look at the second largest economy in the world, China, is partly locked down now in some of the biggest and largest cities in the country. And this will also have impact on the global economy, because China is growing slower, and the demand from China will, of course, go down. And we will, for the future, have to learn from this pandemic that we have to have medicine, we have to have medical equipments much closer than before. We can't wait for weeks for this to arrive. We also have to be able to step up vaccination fast. And we know that we have paid a huge price. 15 million people lost their lives so far in this pandemic.
What kind of initiatives is the World Economic Forum currently working on to either prevent or manage the next pandemic? Bill Gates has come out recently. He says it's going to take $1 billion each year to prevent the next pandemic. He's calling for a global mobilization of forces to deal with it. What are your thoughts? Is that the kind of thing that the World Economic Forum would support?
Indeed. And I think there will be a need for more than $1 billion US. We have to really address the blind spots that we're still facing. I think that what we saw on the vaccine side was a big learning. It took less than a year to develop effective vaccines. In the past, we have seen this taking a decade, and the whole mRNA technology is something that we have to build on. In Davos in 2017, we launched this CEP initiative. This is an organization that is built for scaling up very fast new vaccines if you see new diseases or pandemics coming. Here we have to invest much more. And what we have learned is that COVID anywhere is COVID everywhere. But we don't act accordingly. When 1/3 of the global population is not vaccinated yet, if they will then see new waves of COVID, also new variants can be brewing in these countries, and then it can hit back. So we really need to think globally and act regionally and locally, but we will need to also support the developing countries that are really badly hit. And for the first time in 3 decades this year, we will see extreme poverty growing again. It has been reduced every year. We've gone from 40% of people living in extreme poverty 3 decades ago to 10% now. And now it's on the rise due to the aftermath of this terrible pandemic.
Well, so many big issues that the world is dealing with right now. We've spoken about the pandemic, about Ukraine as well, but there's also many countries on the brink of a recession, rising inflation we're dealing with, the food crisis as well. What do you think is the biggest global crisis we're facing today?
Very short term, I think the weakening recession is of great concern, because we invested $14 trillion US. We haven't seen this stimulus since the Second World War to fight the consequences of COVID when it came to the global economy. Many countries are now indebted, and if we see a slowing of the recovery before it really started, there is very little ammunition to fight a new recession. So that's why we have to get it right. Of course, we have to take inflation seriously. In many countries, we have inflation we haven't seen in 40 years. For example, now in the United Kingdom and the US, so the interest has to go up. But we also have to make sure that we don't lose the baby with the bathwater, because if we don't continue some of the investments that also can create growth, we are really in a very bad situation. And then with less growth and potentially a recession, we will see jobs being lost, we'll see increased unemployment and less prosperity. And the world needs economic growth to address poverty eradication. We also need economic growth to also face and avoid a new food crisis. And of course, the energy prices and energy access is critical here, because without access to competitive energy, there will be no real recovery. So we're really in the most complicated economic situation, I think, now for decades.
No easy solutions there either. We wish you the best of luck in Davos this week. Børge Brende, President of the World Economic Forum, thank you very much for speaking with us on Frankly Speaking.
Thank you.